Hey everyone, this is Mike with Real Dead, and today we're going to talk about the difference between Nosferatu 2024 versus Nosferatu 1922. And this is full of spoilers, so if you haven't watched both, I highly encourage you to go ahead and go watch both of them, then come back and watch this. Or if you really don't care about that and you just saw the 2024 version, and you just want to know the difference, go ahead and hang around because we're going to talk a lot of details between the difference between 22 and 2024. And, I think it's worth, a lot of people say, oh, it's an exact copy of it. There's a lot of resemblance, and Eggers tries to stay as close as possible as he can to the 1922, but there are some major differences in the two films, and we're going to dive into them right now. So the original version of this came out in 1922, and it was a German film, and it's a classic called Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. So Eggers puts his own spin on it. The beginning of this movie, he plays very close to the original, but then towards the middle to the end of it, it changes quite a bit. Let's go ahead and dive into some of those right now. So in the original, it was a silent film, and it was kind of based off a five stage. It was kind of the standard template for silent film movies back in those days. It is an hour and a half long, just a tad under an hour and a half. The new version, I think, is like 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2 hours and 20 minutes. So there's about a 40 to 45 minute difference in time. And to me, that's a huge difference. I'm kind of along the side of, I think the newer version is a tad too long. Probably could have cut 20, 30 minutes out of it and would have made it a much better film, in my opinion. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the differences right off the bat, and that is the characters. So in the original, you have Hutter and Ellen, and I think in the newer version it's Thomas and Ellen. So the only difference in the names is the husband in both of them. In the original, Hutter leaves his wife with his friends and his wife, which is similar to the new movie, but that's about it. There's not a lot of going into them and their characters like there is the new one. The new one dives deeper into the friend and his friend's wife as well, who becomes very close with Ellen. Whereas the original did not. I mean, they did show him a couple times in the movie, like when they're writing letters, and when he finally writes a letter, he's coming home and sends a letter to her in the original. But no, nothing about two kids and some other things that we'll talk about in a second. So in the original, Hutter has a picture of his wife in his locket, and that's what he takes with him to go see Count Orlok, which is really Dracula or a vampire. Bram Stoker's was the original writer of the book, and the family fought hard to not allow the 1922 version to come out. They just didn't want it. So, in all honesty, they stole from Bram Stoker's Dracula, and that's why they changed the name to Orlok as the vampire instead of Count Dracula. Um, but the original version, he goes to see Count Orlok. There's not the newer version shows a lot of things like of a cult thing, and they find this vampire and they're going to stab a stake through its heart. In the newer version, the older version doesn't do any of that. He's just on his way there, and a guy takes him there. Now he does stay at an inn on the way, which is similar to the newer versions that he stays at a place with a bunch of gypsies, and they kind of laugh at him, and that's where he wakes up, and they warn him about going to see the Orlok. In the older version, he stays at an inn and he finds a little book, and as he's reading that book, it tells the lore of the vampires and the sucking of the blood, and that's kind of how he finds out about that. Now, in the original version, when he arrives, the carriage, the guy drops him off with the carriage. He won't go any further, and the guy's like, "Hey, you got to still take me there." Remember, the original is a silent film, so in between acts, they're throwing up where you can read what's getting ready to happen or what just happened. So that's how it kind of tells the story, but you can tell through the acting, kind of what's going on. In the newer version, it's kind of like this mythical thing, like his carriage shows up and takes Thomas to the castle. It's not like that in the original. Of course, there's 102 years difference too. Uh, but they take him to a certain point in the original Hutter, and as he stops, Count Orlok is the one in the carriage that comes and picks him up, and then takes him back to the castle. And he says, "Hey, you're really late. My servant's already in bed. Let's start doing this thing." So they start. And in the original, um, he sees a picture of Hutter's wife, and that's what all of a sudden becomes the infatuation that he has to get by the house that is in front of Hutter and Ellen, and he's longing to. He says in the movie that hey, she has a like a pretty long neck or something to that effect. Because in the original, he's biting their necks. It's the typical vampire lore. Whereas in the newer version, it's a little bit more horrific. Skarsgård and the Orlok character sinks into their chests and it's more vicious in a way. They start convulsing. It's not like that in the original. In fact, in the original, Hutter writes a letter back to his wife Ellen saying, "Hey, I got two mosquito bites on my neck," after he'd already been bitten. And really, what that was Orlok had bit him that night. Um, so those are kind of the difference up to that. In the newer version, there's a locket of hair that is inside the locket, and also we're going to go into some major differences here with Ellen and Orlok's relationship. So there are multiple quotes from the original and the new one, which is pretty cool. They're little bitty nuggets of information there, but like in both films, Thomas and Hutter bring their wife before they leave flowers, as a gift before they leave, and in both of them, they're upset about it. Ellen is upset, and she's like, why would you kill them, the lovely flowers? And they actually say the exact same thing in the 1922 and the 2024 version, which I thought was very cool. So, what are the big differences in the newer version? And I get it. Eggers had to put his own spin on this. Is the friends of Thomas and Ellen. In the newer version, 2024, the friend's name is Anna, the wife, and Frederick. Frederick is the builder, a shipbuilder. He's like a millionaire, I'm sure, back in those times. And he's over the shipyard, and he's the owner of it. And that's who Ellen stays with while Thomas goes to see Count Orlok and get him to sign the real estate papers to buy the old abandoned house across the street from them. And they really, in the newer version, dive into that storyline because in the original, it's just like you see them and that's it. There's no really diving deep into them. They don't have the two little girls like in the newer version. Um, in the newer version, you can see like Orlok ends up getting with Anna, and spoiler alert here, he kills her. He also kills the two little girls. The plague is also running rampant here, and in the original, it's more of they're blaming the his servant. He may have been his name may have been Knock. I may be wrong on that, but they're blaming him and Nosferatu for the plague coming into town, and it's more of the scapegoat is the servant, and they're after the whole town's after him to kill him. In the newer version, it's still the plague going throughout the town, but Nosferatu's love to get back to Ellen is the main storyline here. But with the side characters, they're flushed out a lot more in the newer version. While Thomas is away, she's having dreams. Ellen is. She's having nightmares. She's seeing the Count come to her. And then the Anna, the wife, starts having some issues as well. And then he comes and kills her and the two daughters, like I mentioned earlier. But once that whole family dies, they put them in a mausoleum. And then it's kind of a weird thing with the new version, but I get Eggers' twist on it because he's kind of a little dark in that way. But the Frederick goes to the mausoleum and then like sees the two daughters in their caskets, and then opens up the casket of his wife, and it insinuates they have a sexual relations there. So that was really dark and different compared to the original version. They don't ever show them dying that I recall, and it's not nearly fleshed out like it is nowadays. Um, Also, the William Defoe character in the new film, he's kind of like a professor of an occult. Some people say he's crazy or not, but he's kind of like a vampire slayer. In the original, there's not that in the 1922 version. So one of the major differences is the relationship between Ellen and Orlok. In the original, like I said earlier, it's more of an obsession by Orlok after he sees the locket picture of Ellen from Hutter. In the new version, you hear this story that Ellen tells of that she was young and she was lonely, and the count came to her, Orlok came to her, and they kind of had this intimate thing from a young age, I guess. I don't know what they're saying by young, if it's 10 or 12, 13, 15, I don't know. Um, but she is playing a young, kind of a young lady in this one as well. But and that Ellen is the one that brought him back from his coffin, and to get back to her. He was longing for her. And that's kind of the storyline here when the newer one is and there's a huge difference there because in the original, it's 102 years ago and technology is a lot different and makeup and everything else. But in the original, Orlok has like long fingers, he's got pointed ears, he's got buck teeth, and you see him right off the bat. In the newer version, it's more dark, sinister. You don't ever really get a good look at Orlok or Bill Skarsgård up close. To me, that's what made that movie great. They always showed him in shadows or part of his face, not his whole face. But until the very end, and then you do see his full face and full body, but his body is starting to decay. It's starting to, it's just have a nasty look to it, and you see that at the very end of the movie. But yeah, the whole storyline of the relationship between Ellen and Orlok is more of a gothic romantic now. A lot of a gothic romance now compared to the other one. It was just he was longing once he saw her picture in the locket to go, to buy the house and get there and then eventually, drink her blood as well. Now, one of the biggest things too is the mustache. And listen, I originally was like, no way, you can't have Count Dracula Orlok with a mustache. I mean, you can't do that. But the more I read into this, it kind of changed my mind on it. That Eggers was trying to get more to the time period, and everybody back in that time period, and I think even in interviews with Skarsgård, he says that they looked at photos and pictures or actually paintings back then in that time period, and everybody had a mustache. So even the Count Dracula or Arlok in this newer Eggers has the big, the rice cool stash going on, which may throw you off when you first see it. I kind of laughed out loud when I first saw it, but I'm okay with it now that I've kind of processed it a little bit more. All right, so that's the main differences in my opinion. What do you think about this? I know that, I'm not a professor of movies or anything like that. That was just me watching the 1922 version. After I'd already watched the 2024 version, I'd seen the 1922 many years ago, probably 20, 25 years ago, and had not watched it since. But after seeing Nosferatu in 2024, I did want to go back and watch it again. I highly recommend watching both these films. And if you haven't seen either, and unfortunately I've spoiled everything for you, I would watch the 1922 version first, then go watch the 2024 version. But if you haven't and you've watched the 2024 version, go ahead and watch it again and then go back and watch the 1922. I think you'll have a more respect for a couple things. Number one, the 1922 and how well they did this for 102 years ago. Um, the other is uh, how Eggers tried to stay true, but you'll notice the major differences in this. So I've heard some people say, "Oh, it's a exact replica of the 19." It's not an exact replica of the 1922 version at all. But one other last thing I forgot to mention is the difference at the very end of the movie, how Count Orlok um, dies. In the original version, he comes into the room with Ellen, and she basically in both stories they're giving themselves up for the plague, to get rid of the plague and to get rid of the count. And she gets bitten in the original on the neck, as a typical vampire does his victims. And then there's this whole thing about he can't see light and daylight, and the cock crowing, and you hear the cock crowing in both of them, and then you see in the original 1922 the sunlight hits Nosferatu and he dissipates. You see smoke. In the newer version, which is a big difference, and I see it in 2024 doing it this way. Starts having intercourse with Ellen, and you see his back, and it's nasty and grotesque, and it's decaying, and you see the back of his head, his, his vertebrae, everything, and he bites into her chest to instead of the neck, and then she tells him to do it again. She's really, wanting to, she's giving herself up to die for this. And she's doing it to save her husband and save the land and country, is my impression of it. Whereas the count thinks she's doing it for him because she really wants him to be with her forever. So but and the light hits him, and then at the very end of the movie you see his bones and his body on top of her when Thomas comes in. In the original, Hutter comes in and just sees her, and he's upset about it. In the newer one, Thomas comes in and sees her laying on top of her, and he's kind of just bones at that point. But thank you guys again. Tell us what you think. Did you like it? Did you not like it? I hope this video gave you just a little bit of glimpse into the old one, maybe without even going back and see it. But I do highly recommend going back and seeing the 1922 version of Nosferatu. Thank you guys. Please like, comment, subscribe, and join us on Real Dead. We're your complete horror channel. Also, check us out on Blue Sky if you've joined that social media as well, and also on Facebook. Thank you.